Comcast said, you two, we're going to have to try to mend some cliche fences, and you two are going to go in there and you're going to try to tamp it down. Because Comcast knew the next day they were going to announce that MSNBC is vapor. That is a huge meteor story.
Why is
Enormous.
it vapor? Just because they're spinning it off and putting them in the... They're spinning off a bunch of brands.
There's no spin-off.
There is. It's a spin-off company.
There's no spin-off. See, you buy the propaganda, Cuomo.
Oh, okay.
See what I mean about
I'm just saying
people?
what's being reported.
All right.
But what do you know?
Yeah, I know, but why would you believe what's being reported? You want the real story? Here
yes,
it comes.
Please.
So they're uncoupling their word, Comcast, MSNBC from NBC News. That means MSNBC has no resources at all. None. They're not going to be able to pay these people millions of dollars, Rachel Maddow, whatever she's making. NBC News is saying, we don't want you around. Why? Because NBC News' numbers, Lester Holt and the Today Show, are catastrophe, because half the country equates NBC News with MSNBC, and they won't watch. So NBC is desperately trying to save the mothership of information, and they have to throw MSNBC overboard. They're not putting anything into MSNBC. They want to sell it. So where's Georgie Soros now? Georgie's buying radio stations. You can get MSNBC for nothing. They'll give it to you. They don't want any more of this. And you know what's next? The View. ABC News is going to have to cut ties with The View. And you saw that today or yesterday when Sunny Hostin had to read a legal statement in the middle of a segment. The lawyers get Whoopi Goldberg's ear, and it said, we're bringing a statement in on a teleprompter. She reads it. So it is over for these far left networks. Done, never coming back. Dracula's stake in the heart.
It's happening, gang. We are watching the breakup of the legacy media in real time. Things are so bad over at MSNBC. Things have become so toxic that executives are officially removing MSNBC as far away as they possibly can from their flagship NBC. The Wall Street Journal just dropped a bombshell report revealing that Comcast was planning on spinning off the fledgling ultra-liberal freak show, MSNBC. Comcast has announced that they are moving forward with a plan to spin off its NBC Universal Cable TV networks, which includes MSNBC, as the ultra-woke network is in a complete tailspin, hemorrhaging viewership and ad revenue. And needless to say, things got a bit awkward when the utterly repulsive narcissist Joe and Mika tried to address the Wall Street Journal report.
Drudge at the top said, oh, like news meltdown, all this other stuff. I mean, I could be completely wrong. We could all be fired a year from now or whenever this happens. You never know what's going to happen.
Or tomorrow.
So according to Joe and Mika, they could both be fired tomorrow. Things are that dire over at MSNBC. In fact, reports are coming out that things have become so toxic for MSNBC that they may even have to change their name. If the spinoff company ends up getting sold, which is what spinoffs are often precursors to, the new ownership may very well seek to sponge away MSNBC's accumulated toxicity by changing its name entirely. So we're literally looking at having MSNBC wiped off the face of the earth. Let that hit you. The New York Post is reporting that MSNBC staffers are in a panic over the Wall Street Journal report. The Post reports that staffers, fearing the very real prospects of looming layoffs, peppered the new incoming leadership of the spinoff with frantic questions about the future of the network. Apparently, such notables as Rachel Maddow and Katie Tur were in attendance at the meeting as well. Meanwhile, the fallout from Joe and Mika's kissing the ring of the king of Mar-a-Lago continues. The ratings for Morning Joe have tanked ever since their announcement of the meeting on Monday. It's being reported that their audience has dropped another 17%, right? This is on top of the near 50% ratings drop they suffered after the election. And here's one of those former audience members saying she's had enough.
Hold, please.
So Mika and Joe went down to Mar-a-Lago to kiss the ring. It's the last time I ever watched Morning Joe. Period. End of statement. Unreal. Unreal. For months you were telling us he's the worst thing that could happen to this country and democracy. And then you go kiss his ring? Despicable. Despicable you. Both of you.
When I came across this story about Joe Rogan saying that many in the entertainment industry have been thanking him for endorsing Trump, it struck me as a perfect example of how certain cultural shifts are being covered predominantly by right-leaning sources and being missed by the left. Now, I've seen this covered extensively on Ground News. Ground News is a website and app that compiles stories from over 50,000 outlets from around the world and lets you compare coverage across the political spectrum so you can get the facts for yourself. Check them out at ground.news/Steve. So here's the story on Ground News. I found it through their blind spot feed, which shows stories disproportionately covered by one side of the political spectrum. So I always check the blind spot feed because it helps me stay fully informed. Now, this story's been covered by roughly 20 sources, with 64% coming from the right. And look at this, just 9% coming from left-leaning sources. So it's clear from the lack of reporting on one side of the political spectrum that this is a blind spot story for the left. With Ground News, we can compare headlines ourselves to get a clear picture of how each side is presenting the issue. So the left-leaning headline states, Joe Rogan says hippies and artists have been thanking him for last-minute Trump endorsement because they can't do it. While a right-leaning headline reads, Joe Rogan says many in the entertainment industry had privately thanked me for endorsing Trump. So you can see the difference. The left-leaning headline frames Rogan's language as provocative, while the right-leaning headline is more straightforward, alluding to cultural shifts toward free speech and anti-censorship themes that are resonating in certain creative circles. Now, if you want to stay informed on important issues and get a full view of the news landscape, check out ground.news/Steve. You can click the link in the description below or scan the QR code for 50% off the unlimited access Vantage plan. This is the best deal of the year, and if you're already a subscriber, you can even gift Ground News for 50% off to family or friends. When you support Ground News, you're also supporting the work we do right here at Turley Talks. Click on that link below right now. So as you can see, Rosie's big mad. She's big mad. She's not watching Joe and Mika anymore, which of course begs the question, Rosie, why were you watching them at all? This is the same guy back in June who looked straight into the camera and told you that this is the best Biden ever. He's cogent. The best Biden ever. And you believed him. You actually believed that absurd assessment over what you were seeing with your own eyes. With Biden tripping up the stairs or shoe shuffling as he walked, salivating over his chin, slaughtering prepositions with every sentence he tried to utter. You actually believed Joe over that? Again, it raises the question of the extent to which the left is imploding under the weight of their own lies. I've said this many times in the couple of weeks since the election, but conservatives, you do not like being lied to. I know firsthand. You do not like being lied to. You constantly gave me pushback in any video I did. Good pushback, nothing rude, very good pushback. On any video I did on Trump's astonishing polling leading up to the election, on how all the indicators were showing that he was running away with this, that he was stronger today than he's ever been either in 2016, 2020, the feedback I would constantly get from you is, Dr. Steve, that's fine, but is it really true? Are those polls accurate? Is this really true? You wanted to know if things were dire for Trump. You wanted to know it. You wanted to know the truth, and that's because you're committed to truth. Conservatives seek to live in truth. We seek to understand reality and adjust our lives accordingly. The woke left, as you know, the woke left is the complete opposite. The woke left wants to be lied to. The woke left craves fabrication. They demand spin. Why? Because they live in a fabricated reality. As Jack Nicholson would say, they can't handle the truth. And ultimately, I would argue it's because liberalism is fundamentally about emancipating the sovereign individual from any and all constraints. As the Russian geopolitical philosopher Alexander Dugin would argue, if your fundamental premise is to emancipate the sovereign individual from any and all constraints, that includes the constraints of truth. It includes the constraints of reality, right? Hence transhumanism. And so I think what we're seeing here with poor Rosie O'Donnell is what happens when you live by lies. The reason why lies are so fundamentally wrong is they are corrosive. They destroy. Truth gives life. Lies destroy. And this, to me, is why the legacy media is ultimately falling apart. Unfortunately for Joe and Mika and the whole of MSNBC, they are all falling victim to the rise of a new communication era characterized by what scholars call techno-populism. Now, at the beginning of this movement, at the beginning of the rise of social media, techno-populism simply referred to the various ways in which populist politicians and movements effectively utilize social media to bypass and get around the liberal left-wing gatekeepers of the legacy media. We certainly, of course, saw that in its par excellence form with Donald Trump, especially with his Twitter account back in the day, back in 2016 and all throughout his first presidency. But something has happened ever since then to completely change the power ratios in our nation and indeed in much of the world. Techno-populism refers now more to how the entirety of the telecosm, the internet, the world of the internet, what we call the telecosm, the whole of the digital social media world is actually recalibrating itself around distinctively populist sentiments. And this is because, I'm getting ahead of myself, and this is because the internet, what we often refer to as the telecosm, has effectively democratized information. Information is no longer the sole possession monopolized by the legacy media as it was during the late 19th and 20th centuries. Instead, the internet has radically decentralized information, dispersing it away from any monopoly and giving each person the same immediate access to the same digital information that anyone at CNN or MSNBC would have access to. And that has put the masses in the position of being able to fact check the fact checkers. And needless to say, those self-anointed fact checkers have been routinely found wanting. Again, this is what happens when you live by lies. You're eventually found out. And so the mind-blowing takeaway here is that techno-populism is no longer about how populists are conforming themselves to social media, effectively using social media. It's now far more profound and far more meta, as it were. It's now about how social media is becoming itself radically populist. Social media itself is recalibrating around populist sentiments. Just think of how Twitter, now X, has transformed ever since Elon Musk bought it. Take a look at this.
So one of the big reasons he bought Twitter/X is because he wanted to make it his own platform, remake it in his own image. And I think this really gets at it. Look at this. The party ID among those who regularly use X/Twitter for news. Back in 2022, 65% of those who regularly use Twitter/X for news were Democrats. Just 31% were Republicans. Look at where we are today. Just a completely different picture. Now it's basically split between Democrats at 48%, Republicans at 47%, And what I should note, Mr. Berman, is this new overall makeup matches the overall electorate far better.
So just a few years back, Twitter was 70% Democrat in terms of its usership. And that's, of course, because of how they police. They intended that. They policed speech in such a way that only liberal viewpoints were allowed on the platform. Today, with such restrictions completely lifted, the platform now faithfully reflects the electorate. That's technopopulism. And what's the result? The result is that those legacy media outlets that sought to artificially and inordinately represent the liberal left-wing viewpoint, in other words, lie, are going the way of the dodo bird. They can no longer compete in a telecosm that is increasingly exposing their lies as it recalibrates around the actual makeup of the electorate. And if you are no longer seen as a reliable mediator of information, viewers will go elsewhere, hence the collapse of the legacy media. All of this is to say that the end of the legacy media is indeed baked into the cake of the emerging telecosmic civilization. Populism is the wave of the future. The legacy media's era has indeed come to an end.